life worth living, that which we all aspire to. That is the charge today. That is that Judge C.V. Johnson lived such a life. My name is Stephen Gonzalez, Chief Justice of the Washington Supreme Court, the first man of color to hold such a position. As such, I know that Judge Johnson was also a man of firsts, and that he has educated, supported, and mentored generations of us who take these positions of firsts. May it please the court, we're here today to present that evidence, and I submit to you that you will hear testimony that will convince you beyond a reasonable doubt. Nay, we would take yet a higher burden of proof beyond all doubt that Justice C.V. Johnson lived such a life. Now, I haven't given an opening statement for 20 years, but today I step away from my role as a neutral and become again an advocate, because it is rare in the life of an advocate to have a case so strong, so complete, so overwhelming. This is such a case. You will hear from people from all walks of lives and generations, different levels of court, lawyers and judges, people from the faith community. They will tell you that Judge Johnson was a hero, a giant, one who forged paths for all of us to follow. When we want to know what does a leader of color look like, we need look no further than Judge Johnson. You will hear from people who knew him decades ago. In fact, some of the people who mentored Judge Johnson have already themselves retired, leaving behind many, many people that they themselves have also mentored and brought along behind them. You will hear that he was a man of grace, of dignity, of intellect, and great intelligence, who could see beyond today and beyond tomorrow, but decades ahead of his time. At the close, you will hear argument from Craig Sims, bringing together all of the witnesses that you've heard in between. And I am convinced that you will find, beyond any doubt, that Judge C.V. Johnson lived a life worth living. Thank you.
As we are gathered virtually to celebrate the life and legacy of Judge Johnson, we remember a distinguished champion of justice, a pillar of the community, and a Seattle legend, a man who was deeply devoted to his family, his faith, and the law. Through his work as a judge, a deeply respected leader of the NAACP, and an active member of his church and community, he was a trailblazer. His wisdom, the compassion he showed for those who stood before his bench, and his dedication to improving the justice system has made us a better city. After breaking barriers himself, he inspired hundreds of young lawyers, including me. Many of us are forever grateful to have learned from Judge Johnson. He was always unfailingly gracious, but at the same time, demanding. When you fell short in his courtroom, he spoke with that voice that left you knowing you never wanted to fall short again. Judge Johnson was a remarkable lawyer and judge who worked for just results in every case that he touched. But he also knew, and he taught us, that true justice requires changing, reforming, and sometimes dismantling the systems that keep injustice in place. Decades ago, Judge Johnson and I served together in the initial days of police reform efforts. He made Seattle one of the first U.S. cities to eliminate the Internal Affairs Department and create an independent Office of Police Accountability. Judge Johnson was so determined in the fight for justice and inspired so many, not just by his words and actions, but by who he was. It is always so hard when such a strong and unrelenting voice for justice is lost. When a person who has filled so many lives over so many years is suddenly absent. When a man who has taught us so much has left us to teach ourselves. But today is also joyous. Today is joyous because his voice is not quieted. That beautiful, resonant voice lives on through the many people he has nurtured and mentored, through the NAACP and the Lauren Miller Bar Association, and through the choir of First AME. Today is joyous because he is not absent. He is here, and within the hearts of the thousands he has touched and inspired here and across the country. And today is joyous because we were so fortunate to know him, to love him, and because our teacher has not left us. The Lord has just finally summoned him home to rest. Judge Johnson was the best of Seattle, and he will be missed so much by his loving family, friends, and the community. God bless you.
Hello, my name is Pastor Kerry Anderson, and I serve as the senior minister of First AME Church, Seattle, Washington, where Judge Charles V. Johnson and his family are members. We celebrate his life, we mourn his loss, but we will always cherish his memory. Judge Johnson was our church attorney for many years. He served as vice chair of the trustee board for many years and helped lead and guide the church in its ministry and mission and all of the temporal concerns of the church. He was instrumental in starting the Youth and Law Forum, now known as the Judge Charles V. Johnson Youth and Law Forum, and was a very, very significant contributor to our famed scholarship fund, giving over a series of years some $30,000+. How we thank God for his life, we thank God for his family, and we thank God for his memory and his legacy. He was so instrumental in helping to start some of our nonprofits, including our famed Housing Association and also our Martin Luther King Famed Community Center. To Mrs. Johnson and to the rest of the family, hold your head up. We celebrate his life with you. We mourn his life with you, but we always will cherish his memory along with you, for he has done great things. And for that, we say to God be the glory for the things he has done.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
I do.
I do.
I do. This morning I am here to speak on Charles V. Johnson, the judge. He was a friend, a mentor, an advocate for the NAACP, for the community, and for me. I learned how to be a member of the NAACP Executive Committee under the judge's tutelage. It was interesting. He was hard, but fair. He knew what he wanted, and you did not play. He was serious about civil rights, the community, and what we were doing in the community. I learned from the judge that not everybody is going to like what you say or what you do or how you do it, but you have to be steadfast in what you believe. And if you believe in the NAACP, if you believe in the community, he once told me, you do what you have to do. He was a mentor to me personally, a friend. We laughed a lot We traveled to the national conventions together, or I would see him while I was there. We shared a lot of ideas. He supported one of the programs that I was interested in and that I ran for so many years, called the AXO program. He was very, very supportive of that program. He believed that we should do more for our youth to entice them to do better, to give them a vision, to give them hope. And that's what he did. He touched so many lives in so many different ways. And everybody thinks or thought that they were his friend. I'm not saying that you weren't, but he made you feel that's the kind of man he was. High in integrity, always for right, had consistently wanting to make sure that the truth be told. He had a hard life. He didn't have an easy life coming up. But look what he did. Look what he made of himself, and look what he helped all of us become. I feel honored and humbled by my experience and my relationship with him, my love for him. Even when he was sick, he still had a dignity about him that you don't find every place. He never to me complained when I asked him how he was doing. He would just say, "I'm here," and let it go at that. I will miss him. I will miss his joking. I will miss his support, really miss his support. But he left me with something that I will always have. I know what it is to have a friend. I know what it is to have a friend in high places that is humble. He was not braggadocious. He was not uppity. He was just Charles V. Johnson, the judge.
Is a giant among many who was seeking for the civil rights of blacks and brown minorities. He sought to integrate the schools, for open housing, for many other things, especially the courts, where he could provide equal justice for those individuals. But most of all, I remember him for his insight in creating the Youth and Law Forum, where he taught the law. I do that because my grandson, when he was about 10, he attended the Law Forum, and he decided from that conference that he wanted to be an attorney. He is now an attorney. In fact, he's now in the Army, in the Judge Advocacy Corps, as a first lieutenant. That I will always remember. He provided that for us and our family. God bless him and the family.
My name is Mary Flowers, and I'm here today to give testimony that Judge Charles Johnson lived his absolute best life. I knew of Judge Johnson. I knew who Judge Johnson was long before I knew Judge Johnson. Growing up, he was always very visible as a leader in the NAACP. And so even from as a teenager all the way through my young adulthood, I knew who he was. I wasn't a member of, or an active member of the NAACP, but always was appreciative and attentive to what the NAACP has done for our community. I joined the NAACP as an executive board member in the early 2000s. And so it was at that point that I really came to know Judge Johnson, who he is, who he was, and I say is because he's still very much in our lives, in our hearts, and always will be. But I knew him as a man of dedication, a man of kindness. I came to the NAACP in the early 2000s, and he'd already been a member, served in leadership on the board for probably 40 to 50 years when I got there. So that was the legacy that I walked into. But what I met was a man who was humble, who was kind, brilliant, who was thorough, and treated everyone with respect and with dignity. He befriended me when I came on. He helped me to understand the process. He was always an encourager. And it's ironic that I sit here on this witness stand because I came into the NAACP as a person who was organizing in community and organizing also in prisons with the Black Prisoners Caucus. So that's really how I came into the organization and worked with the prison committee. And in that work really brought the essence of the Black Prisoners Organization. And oftentimes members of the NAACP would go to the prisons for summits and participate in some of the work, the organizing work of the men there. And so it was over time that even though Judge Johnson was a person who did sit on the bench and maybe did not necessarily have the relationship, that type of relationship with people who were in prison, he was a person who was always willing to listen, always willing to learn, always had a curiosity, and he was very intrigued by the work that the Black Prisoners Caucus was doing, and always very supportive. And so in the course of those many years that we worked together, we had the opportunity to share many stories. He had the opportunity to meet people as they came out of prison and came into the NAACP, including the many members, people that went into membership and also in leadership of the NAACP. Again, he was very open and always supportive. And I have just come to think of him oftentimes when I'm facing dilemmas, difficult decisions, controversy, just difficulties. I always think about his smile, his gentleness, his thoughtfulness, and I'm calmed in some way. He's a calming spirit. I'm grateful that he was part of my life. I'm grateful for his dedication of probably 60 years with NAACP. I'm grateful that he stood through it no matter what was going on. I'm grateful for who he was in terms of his relationships with community. He was a person that talked about his history. He shared that history of working at the post office, coming out of the service, and then going to law school, that journey that he took. But not just going to law school and not practicing as an attorney and then becoming a judge, but really giving back through his volunteer service, through his volunteer commitment. He lended all of his services. He served as treasurer for the NAACP for many, many years, and we always knew that it was in good hands when it was in his hands.
My name is Jim Rogers. I'm the presiding judge for King County Superior Court, where Judge Johnson served the citizens of King County for many years. Judge C.V. Johnson, as we called him, was a man of many accomplishments, a family man, a trailblazer in the legal profession, and a community leader. I want to mention a few things in my testimony about his career as a judge who served as the head of our court. He served as the presiding judge, the president of our court, from November 1989 to January 1994, and that was a very critical time for our court. When he became presiding judge, criminal cases were backlogged and delayed. Some of our judges and court staff struggled with understanding the increasing diversity of King County. We needed more interpreters. Our record keeping was outdated. In short, the court desperately needed reform. Judge Johnson rose to the occasion and he led. He is now remembered as a giant of our court. I have before me the court's 1992 Planning for the Future annual report. And in this report, Judge Johnson describes 5 new projects that were started in 1992. The establishment of an interpreter services office, a criminal case reduction project, a new orientation program for the unprecedented 5 new judges elected that year, efforts to use computers, and a program to increase cultural diversity. How contemporary that sounds to all of us on the bench today. Today, your Superior Court faces the headwinds of a pandemic, discussions on the court's responsibility on race, use of new technology, and the education of many new judges. And in our work on that, we stand on the shoulders of Judge Johnson's leadership team and the work that he did. Their work in the early 1990s helped establish King County Superior Court as a national model of court excellence, and we strive to meet the mark they set every day. So in gratitude for the life C.V. Johnson led and the legacy he left behind, I want to say on behalf of all the judges and staff of King County Superior Court, thank you, and I offer my sincerest condolences to Judge Johnson's family upon his death. I also want to say in different times, our judges, retired and current, would be robed and sitting in the church during the funeral. But the pandemic prevents this, but I want you to know that we'll all be watching with you virtually and in spirit with our staff and all of our judges.
My name is Richard Jones. I'm a federal judge. First, I would like to pay tribute to Lizelle and the family. Thank you for sharing Judge Johnson. And thank you for your sacrifice for the many hours he toiled to make things right for so many. And you know better than all that required time away from each of you. For me, he was my guiding light, a father to me, a favorite uncle, a best friend, the greatest manner to walk, and always the wisest person I knew. He and Lizelle have always been the parents I looked for in the audience as events took place in my life. To me, Judge Johnson and Lizelle have always been like Black royalty in our community. When he spoke, everyone listened. And when Lizelle spoke, the meeting was over. Judge Johnson was a firm believer that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, to listen twice as much as you talked. I know that almost every step of my career, Judge Johnson was the first person I looked to for guidance, not for answers, but always the best of advice. I know the same can be said by scores of African-American students, lawyers, and judges in Seattle. You didn't make a serious move in your career unless you talked to Judge Johnson first. I want all of you to know that being a judge is hard. Many days you don't want to be the one that has to make that decision. I know for me, there were countless days that after putting on that robe and before I opened the door to the courtroom, facing huge challenges on the other side, I found comfort and drew strength and courage and tried to emulate Judge Johnson. And to myself, I would say, what would Judge Johnson do? I knew that if I showed the type of courage and determination that I learned from him, no decision or challenge would ever be too great. I always felt that if I made Judge Johnson proud, I was doing my job. The lessons I learned from Judge Johnson are quite clear. A firm but dignified approach to conflict will always prevail. It is not how loud you speak, but what you say when you do speak. A quick and ill-tempered manner of dealing with conflict will not cause people to agree with you or follow you. Live your life guided by ethics and you will never fail. Never forget your roots and the road you traveled to achieve. You exemplify this by always reaching out to help others. Please know that I plan to apply what I learned from Judge Johnson until the day I hang up my robe for good. I encourage each of you to do the exact same thing in your own lives. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Justice Susan Owens on the Washington Supreme Court. I didn't have much contact with Judge Johnson when we were both trial judges. He was in Seattle and I was way out in Clallam County. But after I came to the Supreme Court, every single time I saw him, he said, if you see the name Charles V. Johnson, all you have to do is say affirm, affirm. And Judge Johnson, as far as I know, I always did say that.
My name is Attorney Shalee Anderson. I was there with Judge Johnson in those meetings at the NAACP. I saw him talk to us about leadership and service. You know, he was always teaching. There was one time when I was so excited because I had just been appointed NAACP president, and we were going to serve for the city council for the city of Seattle. And I had shared, Your Honor, the mayor wants me to serve in this capacity. Your Honor, city council members have voted me to be a part of this. And Judge Johnson, he looked at me. And you know, if you've ever been before Judge Johnson, he leans in and he whispers in your good ear. That's when you know he's going to give you some good wisdom. And he looked at me and he leaned in and he said, Shalee, this is bigger than just the individual. That when you get invited to a table, you don't look at who the mayor is. You don't look at the city council. When you're invited to the table under the NAACP, that this is an organization that's over 100 years old. That when you sit at the table, you are sitting down with men and women who have lost their lives for this fight. You are sitting down with people who have given up their careers just because they had the courageous effort to speak up for someone else who've been wronged. That this isn't about you being happy because you were invited to the table. He leaned in and he said, this is the NAACP. When you are at the table, you sit down and you listen for that agenda. You make certain that the people who came before us, that what they fought for is aligned with that agenda. And if it's not, you don't sit down. Every table's not meant for you. Judge Johnson, he said that. It was a game changer. It was right inside of a meeting, and those were just some of the lessons that he has taught. And it's not just me. He taught a whole bunch of us. Judge Johnson was about leadership and service, not just for an individual, but for an organization, and he trained up other leaders. I've seen him. So when I hear about the allegations that we are here today to discuss, I witnessed it with my own eyes. Judge Johnson was a servant. He was someone who taught us that if you sat down just by his feet, you are going to be a better person, a better leader. He taught us that this is more than an individual, that as NAACP, you fight for the millions who have given their lives and their careers in this movement. I'm not here to try to blow up his spot. I'm just telling you what I saw. I was there. For years, he's done this. Like I said, I'm not even the only one. Judge Johnson has trained up an army in his decades of service.
You know, when you got assigned out to Judge Charles V. Johnson's courtroom back in the old days when I did trials, I always had this feeling in my heart like this is exactly where I want to be. It was a courtroom that had the dignity and the respect that I wanted in every courtroom. And when Judge Charles V. Johnson stood up to swear somebody in, he stood up and everybody knew this was a solemn occasion where you better tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And he was always fair, and he was always respectful, and such a gentleman. And it was only much later when I was able to see a documentary released in 2014 called Breath of Freedom, which I highly recommend, that I understood his backstory. That Judge Johnson, who believed so much in American justice and liberty and the respect for the system, was himself a witness to the incredible hypocrisy of American justice as well. Serving in Germany in a segregated army and understanding the post-war Germany and where some of the world's worst atrocities had occurred based on race and religion of people, and the caste system there was so horrific that he himself and his fellow black GIs were there, and they were received by the German people with open arms, and they were free to go anywhere and associate with anyone. And they all knew deep in their hearts that the freedoms that they were experiencing in Germany were not awaiting them when they came back to the United States. So the whole picture of C.V. Johnson was a complex man who never let his bitterness come out. He was a positive force for change. He had a tremendous smile. He was a great conversationalist. I had the opportunity to do this interview, which I hope you can find on County TV, King County TV, on the YouTube page. It's about 40 minutes of him talking about his life. Anyway, what a giant, what an amazing person. I'm sorry that we have lost him, but I'm very, very grateful that we had him here in Seattle, Washington, to bring his sense of justice and fairness to our system. He has left an indelible mark, and we will miss him.
Giving honor to the Johnson family, who I have known for the majority of my adult life. Mrs. Lizelle Johnson, Jim Brown, Tracy, Terry, the children and the grandchildren. Giving honor to the NAACP for not letting COVID-19 stop us from saluting Judge Johnson's supreme life and legacy. That life and legacy is epitomized in one saying, and that is, a supreme life is measured not by how much a person gets out of that life, but how much he gives during that life. And Judge Johnson has had a supreme life because in addition to being a judge for nearly 30 years, he continuously gave back to his country, to his community, to his church, and to the African American community. As a matter of fact, Black lives have mattered to Judge Johnson long before it was a global movement. And when you think about it, Judge Johnson has not only helped African American, the African American community, he's also helped people of all races, whether they were Black, brown, red, yellow, or white. As a matter of fact, in 1990, he helped a white guy who I'm sure is still thanking him today. Back in 1990, I was in the state legislature, and Judge Johnson was actually the presiding judge over all of the judges in King County. And a vacancy came up on the state Supreme Court, something that rarely happens. And I and a number of other people begged and pleaded with Judge Johnson to run for the seat. But he told us no. He said not only was he enjoying working as presiding judge of the Superior Court, he actually didn't believe that Washington was ready yet to elect an African American to the state Supreme Court. It had never been done, not only on the Supreme Court, no person of color had ever been elected statewide in our state. And so his decision was final, so we left him alone. That's why we were shocked when about a month later, we're driving down the streets of Seattle and King County and Tacoma and Pierce County, and we saw campaign yard signs everywhere saying, "Vote Charles Johnson, State Supreme Court." I was so excited. I couldn't wait to get home to give him a call. I called up Judge Johnson. I said, "Congratulations, Judge. You did it. What can we do to help?" He started laughing. He said, "Jesse, that's not me. That's a white attorney in Tacoma. His name is Charles W. Johnson. My name is Charles V. Johnson." And I said to him, "So this guy is not even a judge?" He said, "No." I said, "So what's the W in his name stand for? White?" And we both laughed. And we went on, but fast forward to the election night, 1990, Charles Johnson wins the seat on the Supreme Court. And the TV reporters were covering it at different polling places and actually doing interviews with people, asking them who they voted for and why. And I'll never forget a white voter, a white female voter, told the reporter that she had voted for Judge Johnson. She said, "He's a great judge, so I'm sure he'll make a great justice." And that's when we knew that most of the people who had voted for Charles Johnson thought they were voting for the black Charles V. Johnson, not the white Charles W. Johnson. But in 1991, it was the white Charles Johnson who took his oath of office on the Supreme Court, and he's been there ever since. He is now serving 30 years on the bench of the Washington State Supreme Court, and he has one person to thank and one reputation to thank, because he has that supreme job because of the supreme reputation, the supreme commitment to service, the supreme military service, the supreme NAACP leadership, the supreme love of family, the supreme commitment to justice, the supreme reputation, the supreme respect, the supreme admiration that is synonymous with the name Charles V. Johnson. And that's why I'm honored to be here to say, on behalf of all of us, including Justice Charles W. Johnson, rest in power, Judge Johnson, and thank you for giving us a supreme life and legacy.
I didn't meet Judge Johnson in my court in Olympia. I met Judge Johnson in his court in the King County Superior Court in Seattle. He's probably 86 to 89, and I met him because I was standing on the other side of the raised area where he was sitting as a judge on the bench. I was a public defender. I was representing people who couldn't afford a lawyer. He respected my clients and me. I respected his job, and as far as I knew, he didn't give much thought to my job. And then a friend of mine, who was a public defender, became a King County Superior Court judge. I never heard of public defenders becoming judges, and I asked him why he had thought of doing it. And he clearly told me Judge C.V. Johnson encouraged me to do it and to bring my background and experiences to the bench. And I thought, Judge Johnson was looking at that also. And I was a little jealous because he didn't say anything like that to me. But I ran to be a justice in 2012. And I called Judge Johnson, and I didn't even know if he would remember me because we hadn't been in touch that much. But he did. He remembered my dedication and my caring. And he said, let me know what I can do to help, because I want you to bring your background and your experiences as a public defender to the bench. Basically, he had looked at me not just with his eyes or his brain, but with his heart, and was trying to pass the torch to me. That's what I learned from him, and I try to do. And I think that was a life worth living for him.
I'm Nicole Gaines Phelps, and I currently sit in Department 14 of the King County Superior Court bench. I first had the pleasure of meeting Judge Johnson as a young attorney. Although I practiced for a very short time in front of him, as I became a new lawyer in '96, and he officially retired from the bench in 1999. When I was a young deputy, he often would serve as a pro tem judge. And I had the opportunity to be in front of him many times as a King County deputy prosecuting attorney. During those times, I got to witness how amazing he was with people, how he was knowledgeable about the law, but most importantly, how he was very passionate towards holding people accountable with a firm hand, but with compassion as well. Over the next few years, as a member of Lauren Miller, I often was able to sit next to Judge Johnson and talk to him about different things and hear of his experiences. And he really served as a strong mentor to me as a young attorney. Even though he is retired, he never hesitated to give up his time to mentor young attorneys. Later on in my career, when I started thinking about becoming a judge, he was gracious about spending time with me, meeting me for lunches, for coffee, to talk about concerns, to talk about best ways to go about moving about a political appointment if I chose to do that. And then when the opportunity came for me to run for an open seat for the Superior Court, he was so encouraging to me to not let my fears overshadow what he knew I could do. I will miss him so much. And even though he is not on the bench with me, his presence remains, and I feel it every day. First of all, I'm appearing and making my testimonial today from my courtroom, where I have a picture of him above my jury box so that I see him every day to remind me it's his shoulders that I stand upon and the reason why I am here today as a Superior Court judge. Additionally, on my bench where I sit, I have quotes from him that he has provided to different judges over the time about things, and my favorite is, when you haven't made a decision, you have. I look at that oftentimes when I'm struggling on a hard case and wondering what it is that I want to do. I look up to him for guidance in those moments, and I always will. He will be so missed by us, and he serves as an inspiration to all. His presence and his legacy will always be a pillar of our community. Thank you, Judge Johnson, for everything that you did to help our community become the community it is, for your leadership in civil rights, and more importantly, for being such a mentor to young attorneys like me and encouraging us to follow your footsteps. When I put on my robe every day, I hope that I can be even half of the judge that you were, because that means that I'm being an outstanding jurist. Thank you.
NAACP family and friends, thank you for this opportunity to pay tribute to a giant of a man, the Honorable Charles V. Johnson, the community godfather, the African prince. My name is Leroy McCullough. I'm one of the judges of King County Superior Court, and it is my pleasure to serve the community in the shadow of the great late Judge Charles V. Johnson. For many years, I'd seen Judge Johnson at First AME Church, but our professional paths crossed for the first time when he was at Seattle Municipal Court, and I was a law student sent to Judge Johnson by Justice Charles A. Smith, another alpha man, 1906. I was sent to Municipal Court to interview Judge Johnson on the subject of transferring cases, traffic cases of teenagers, to the Municipal Court. So I was able to see Judge Johnson in action. With one nod, with one raised eyebrow, with one word, he was able to cause the most arrogant of defendants to realize who really was in charge. Later on, fast forward to 1989, I was essentially minding my own business, having been employed as a hearing examiner for the city of Seattle, when Judge Johnson and Judge Huggins accosted me and told me in no uncertain terms that it was time for me to apply for a judgeship. It was as if Mount Kilimanjaro had erupted and I needed to listen to what the elders had to say. I did, and it's been my pleasure to serve this community for that length of time. And it's been my pleasure to have the support of Judge and Mrs. Johnson for those many, many years. I'm going to close with this. Others have spoken more eloquently of Judge Johnson's love for his family, for the NAACP, for the YMCA, the Lauren Miller Bar Association, and his beloved First AME Church. So I'll just say this. Judge and Mrs. Johnson loved life as a couple. They were able to enjoy international travel, good food, good friends, and good music. In light of that latter section, the good music part, I'll leave you with this admonition from Ragtime. If you really love Judge Johnson, then we need to honor his memory by doing more than calling his name. We need to be activists. So go out and tell your story. Let it echo far and wide. Make them hear you. How justice was our battle, but how justice was denied. Make them hear you and say to those who blame us for the way we chose to fight, that sometimes there are battles that are more than black or white, and we would not put down our sword when freedom was our right. Make them hear you. Thank you, Judge Johnson. Thank you in the name of the ancestors. Thank you all for supporting this giant of a man.
Hi, my name is Kim Ambrose, and I'm currently a professor at the University of Washington School of Law, but I spent my early career as a public defender in King County, and I had the privilege to appear before Judge Johnson frequently in the 1990s. As a young defender, I thought that Judge Johnson was the embodiment of what a judge should be. I remember the way that he would swear witnesses in, raising his large hand with his powerful, booming voice. I thought no witness sworn in by Judge Johnson would ever dare stray from the truth. I spent a lot of time in juvenile court, as did Judge Johnson. Back then, it was a crushing time in terms of numbers, and we were all stretched, often to the point of breaking. But Judge Johnson always held us to a high standard. He treated the children and families who appeared before him with dignity and respect, and he insisted that we all do the same. He even imposed sanctions on lawyers who appeared late in his courtroom, directing them to pay modest amounts to organizations serving our client community. While it felt harsh, I was inspired by his insistence that we follow his lead and treat those who are caught up in the justice system with respect. A final memory I'd like to share is I had the opportunity to appear before Judge Johnson on his last day on the bench before he retired. My client was being sentenced for a very serious crime that he had committed. We, meaning mostly my client and his community, packed the small courtroom up on Alder with supporters from the community, including his classmates, teachers, mentors, coaches, and many others. I'll never forget how Judge Johnson listened carefully to everyone who wished to speak. Like the wise and thoughtful judge that he was, he weighed everything put before him, and then he decided to sentence this young man consistent with what he heard from community members. And he didn't send him to prison. It was an incredible way for me to remember the judge and the community leader, and it continues to shape the way that I view how our system should work.
I want to take a moment to say thank you to Judge Charles Johnson. I remember early in my career sitting at a coffee table with him and Judge Haley discussing what it was like to be a civil rights attorney back in the 1950s and 60s. They told me that it wasn't just about bricks being threatened to be thrown against your window or crosses being burned or death threats and actions of hate and racism that were overt. It was also about the reality that they couldn't find work and many of their clients could never afford to pay them. So what they would do is they'd work at the post office. They'd work a full shift at the post office, and then after that full shift was over, they would do that work that was so critical to our society as lawyers. As many of you know, Judge Johnson eventually became Your Honor. He's always been a dedicated member of the NAACP, and I remember getting that call from Judge Johnson saying, James, we need you to step up and be the president of NAACP. And I was hesitant at that time, but he told me it was my moral responsibility. It was my duty to stand up for communities in need and be in a space where civil and human rights are protected, and I'm one of the many protectors. And the reality is, without Judge Johnson and his leadership, I wouldn't know many of you. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to help as many people as I've had the chance to get to know and work with. So thank you, Judge Johnson, for your mentorship, your leadership, your patience, your courage, and a life well lived.
Hello, I'm Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes. Reflecting on the life of Judge Charles V. Johnson brought to mind the old fable of the wind and the sun and the bet that they had about which one could force a man's coat from him as he walked on the road below. The wind howled and blew, and all of its ferocity only made the man hold the coat more tightly. And then the sun took over and simply started to radiate its warming rays down on the man, who soon, on his own, removed the coat himself. Judge Johnson, of course, is the sun. In these polarizing times, that warmth and wisdom exhibited by Judge Johnson has proven extraordinarily effective. He chaired in 1999 the Blue Ribbon Commission that led to the creation of Seattle's Office of Professional Accountability. When I was appointed to its first oversight board, I met with Judge Johnson, who brushed aside any preconceived notions about who would care about transparency and police accountability. He reminded me of the mission, said that his door would always be open, and that he'd always be watching. Years later, when I decided to run for this office, Judge Johnson gave his support and reminded me that his door would always be open and that he'd always be watching. And with that gentle authority, I knew that a man whose wisdom was there looking over my shoulder was going to make sure that I was doing the best that I could. Judge Johnson did that with everyone he encountered. I'm personally glad that he didn't see firsthand on earth the white supremacist insurrection at our nation's capital on January 6th. But smiling down from heaven, I think that he would still radiate that same loving message that grieve for a time if you need, but then get up, support each other, and get back in the fight, because the fight for racial equity and social justice is never ending. His model of servant leadership will survive. My condolences to the family of Judge Johnson, and especially to his beloved wife, Lizelle.
Good afternoon. My name is Claude Burfake, First Vice President of the Seattle-King County NAACP. Very short story, but very important, because this is about the Honorable Judge Charles V. Johnson. I can tell a little story. Back in 1974, I was a graduate student out at the University of Washington, and I was an intern for the Seattle Times, which meant I only had, the Times allowed me to continue my graduate work while I was working internally for them with the newspaper company. So, to make a long story short, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I had a class from 3 to 5 p.m., a graduate class. And I had to be at that class exactly at 3 o'clock, but we would get out at 10 minutes to 5. So it gave me enough time to put monies into the meter so that I would have enough time I can spend my 2 hours in class, and get back to my automobile by that time. So in the meantime, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, there was this meter maid, making sure that I was unable to reach my car in ample time so that I wouldn't get a ticket. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, this lady wrote me up knowing that I was struggling. I am a struggling student with a family, graduate, student, her not knowing that, but also working all at the same time. I received, at that time, tickets were $2. Parking tickets were $2. Those tickets escalated because I eventually told this lady that I am not paying for those tickets. You can write me up every day, all day. I'm not paying for those tickets. But anyway, to make a long story short, over the years, I got, over the months, and actually it was over a year, I got arrested. They pulled me over. They took me to jail. I was released, but I had a court date. And that court date was with Judge Charles V. Johnson. Now, I didn't know that much about how he was in the court system, but I did know about him and some of the things that he had been doing within the community. So when I got to the judge and I told my story, and these tickets had piled up so high that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about close to $500. Knowing that I couldn't afford those tickets, but I did explain to Judge Johnson what had transpired. He understood me being a struggling student with a family and trying to work at the same time. He reduced the fine significantly, where I was able to, from that point, take care of my responsibilities, but he also counseled me and letting me know that this should never, ever happen again. And from that day to when, in the last 10 years, Judge Johnson and I met again with the NAACP. And we talked about my plight at that time, and I thought it was hilarious. But then I appreciated and congratulated him for what he had done for me. So thank you, Judge Johnson. Rest in peace, my brother. And I will always think of you as a special person that guided me in the right direction. And God bless your family.
Hello, this is Monica Benton, retired King County Superior Court judge. My condolences to Lizelle, Tracy, Terry, Jimmy, and your many family members. Judge Johnson is an inspiration for all African American judges, those who knew him and those that follow. He inspired us with his countenance in the courtroom, his fairness, his ability to rise above bias that any powerful judge might have displayed, yet he did not. My first memory 37 years ago was conducting my first jury trial before him. He was fair. The defendant was a black woman. I was a black prosecutor, and he was the black judge. I felt throughout the trial that not only did the defendant receive a fair trial, as she was required under the Constitution, but that even young lawyers practicing the ropes would also be fairly heard and considered arguments. Judge Johnson led, at our peak, 15 state court judges in demonstrable ways, one of which was to lend his support and his considered judgment, not only in how we practiced on the bench, but also to add numbers to the bench. He influenced our state governors and enabled many of us, including myself, to get on the state court bench. Judge Johnson also was an archivist. He kept historical documents, one of which I had not seen before was for Charles M. Stokes, the first African American and Judge Johnson's former law partner, to sit on the King County District Court bench. He also, for the 50th anniversary of the Lauren Miller Bar Association, shared with us historical photographs that documented the contribution of Lauren Miller Bar Association members to the struggle in the 60s and 70s for fair housing and fair employment practices. He provides a blueprint of the legacy of stewardship for all of us to follow through his devoted work, the First AME Church, the Lauren Miller Bar Association, and his beloved NAACP. Thank you.
On behalf of our organization, I would like to share this message. We, the members of the Lauren Miller Bar Association, will forever miss the Honorable Charles V. Johnson. Judge Johnson lived a long life, and through that life he touched many. He was a man that wore many hats, but at his core, he was a good man. He was a man that was held in high regard, and he was a man that did a lot for his community. It was Judge Johnson's passion that helped drive younger individuals like myself to the places that we are now at. Without Judge Johnson, I wouldn't have the opportunity to be before you. Without Judge Johnson, our courts would be in simple chaos. Judge Johnson was a man that lived a long life and saw many different things. And while it hurts us to see him gone from this planet this time, we know that his spirit will forever be with us. And for that, we cherish. We cherish the moments that we had with him, and we cherish the memories that we have of him. Thank you, Judge Johnson, for all that you've done for the Lauren Miller Bar Association and the many others that don't fall under that umbrella, but we're still touched by your beautiful spirit. Rest in peace. Rest in power. Rest in paradise. Thank you, Judge Johnson. We love you.
Was a trailblazer with strong leadership in the legal field and throughout the whole Seattle community. Through his courage and passion, he leaves a deep legacy for those who seek to increase justice and equity, inspiring us to speak up and act boldly. I have the distinct pleasure of working with Dr. Terry Hackett, Judge Johnson's daughter, on issues of educational equity in high schools all across the country. Through my relationship with Dr. Terry, I've seen how Judge Johnson nurtured the pursuit of justice with his children, setting them on the path to lead the charge, to build up a critical mass of allies and supporters to promote a society where we will no longer need to say the first African American to, because those barriers will be dismantled and the brilliance of our African American children and young people will be fully nurtured to achieve all of the dreams and aspirations that they have in their heart.
Hello, I'm Eric Z. Lucas, and I just retired as a Snohomish County Superior Court Judge January 1st. And this is my tribute to Judge Johnson, who was pivotal in my career in a lot of ways, including endorsing me and when I decided to run for Superior Court. But I started out as a juvenile court prosecutor in front of him in King County, and he was the judge at trial and at the decline hearing in my career case, State versus Eduardo Vincenti, who we used to refer to as a shoe kid because the juvenile burglary that he committed involved stealing the shoes of a female classmate of his. He was a stalker. But my story about Judge Johnson is about his integrity. At the burglary trial, Judge Johnson convicted Eduardo, and I asked for a psychological evaluation, which in those days was rare, and he granted it. In the meantime, young Vincenti was out creating more crimes. He was eventually charged with criminal solicitation to commit murder in the first degree, and I had to decline him in those days. It was a huge event, the decline hearing. The courtroom was packed. It was against Anthony Savage. And the one thing that surprised me in that case was the level of Judge Johnson's integrity. Anthony Savage and Judge Johnson had been partners together in their law firm in the early days. And Judge Johnson offered to recuse himself at the beginning of that. I refused. He declined him. The case went to national TV, and that's one of the beginnings of my career, which I owe to Judge Johnson.
I am here to honor a great man, Judge Charles V. Johnson. We owe him a debt of gratitude for all the things that he accomplished and fought for our community. We'll never be able to repay him. His contributions are too numerous for me to list during the time that I have. I first met Judge Johnson when I was a student attending a Lauren Miller Bar Association event. I was impressed by his approachability and by his genuine care and concern for the success of us as students. I next saw Judge Johnson when I had the great honor of appearing before him in court when I was a young public defender at juvenile court. Judge Johnson expected nothing short of excellence from us as Black attorneys, and I tried never to disappoint him. Little did I know at that time that he would become both a mentor to me professionally and personally. I cannot count the number of times that I sought out his wise counsel, and he never turned me away, but always took the time. Countless others have the same story to share. I cannot talk about Judge Johnson without talking about the love of his life, Mrs. Lizelle Johnson. Thank you so much for sharing this great man with us and for standing by his side as he fought for racial justice. Judge Johnson was our superhero. He was our Black Panther. We must now pick up the baton that he has left behind and continue in the fight for racial justice and equality and making sure that the rule of law is enforced.
My name is Judge Willie Gregory. I'm the presiding judge of Seattle Municipal Court. Judge Charles V. Johnson has positively affected my life by being an excellent role model. Judge Johnson was presiding judge, Seattle Municipal Court, for 3 terms. He was also awarded the Judge of the Year award by numerous legal organizations. Judge Johnson told me when I asked him what it takes to be a good judge, the following. He said, you need to be a good listener, you need to dispense justice, you need to be firm, and you need to care about the people that appear before you. Judge Johnson has always shown that when I've seen him on the bench, as an attorney before him, and as a colleague. I thank you, Judge Johnson, for being such a good mentor.
My name is Barbara Madsen, and I sit on the Washington Supreme Court. But I started my judicial career in the Seattle Municipal Court, and that's where I became aware of the legacy of Charles V. Johnson. When I became the chief judge of that court, I realized what an impact he had made on the face of that court. He understood that we needed diversity in our employees. He understood that people coming to the court needed to be able to see themselves reflected in the person they were talking to across the counter. In order to achieve his goal of diversity and inclusion, Judge Johnson, throughout the rulebook, created his own employment model, ahead of the curve. It started with recruitment. He didn't go to the usual suspects in the usual places to recruit. He flung a wide net. He needed a diverse applicant pool. If he didn't get it, he would start over. He also knew that he needed a diverse interview pool. He needed those people who were applicants to shine, to be understood, to be heard for who they were and what they brought to the court. So if he didn't have a diverse interview panel, he'd start over there too. Judge Johnson had no problem starting over. Most importantly, though, he knew the people who made the hiring decisions needed to understand the importance of a diverse workforce. So he made sure the supervisors and the managers who would be making the hiring decisions understood the importance of a diverse workforce. It was in this way that Judge Johnson achieved his goal of bringing diversity and inclusion to the Seattle Municipal Court, and in that way, guaranteeing that the people who came to our court understood that this was their court and that we worked for them. When I left in 1992, the Seattle Municipal Court had 56% of its employees were people of color. When I went to the Supreme Court, I realized how much I missed the fabric of diversity, the difference of opinion, the different faces, the different voices. It makes such a difference in the quality of justice. And that's the legacy of Charles V. Johnson. He brought justice to the Seattle Municipal Court. He's my hero.
When my encounter with Judge Charles V. Johnson, when he was attorney Charles V. Johnson, and a group of us were playing poker at Tyrone Smith's house on 32nd Avenue East. And for whatever reason, that Friday night, the Seattle Police Department raided the poker game. And so that was on Friday night. That Sunday morning, all of our names were in the paper. And my mother said, I can't go to Mount Zion this morning because your name's in the paper for being on a poker game that got raided. So anyway, we talked to several people, and because it was in the paper, a lot of people started calling me. And Miss Frances North and Miss Freddie Mae Gaucher actually hooked us up with attorney Charles V. Johnson. they said, well, in addition to him being an attorney, he's also with the NAACP, and that might help. So in my conversations with Judge Johnson, I said, you need to go up to 24th and Jackson. It was 24th and Jackson then. That's how long ago it was. This was talking about the early 60s. I said, there's a place called the Southside Cafe. They have a restaurant on one side and people are playing poker on the other side. So about 2 days later, he called up and he said, Ryan, you're right. He said, I went in there was 2 police officers having a late lunch, and I asked the lady that was serving the food, is there a social gathering next door? She said, oh no, they are playing poker, and if you have to have $25 for table stakes. So as it turns out, Attorney Charles V. Johnson represented us, and after his trip up there, he actually went up there. When he went in, he saw police officers having lunch and folks playing poker next door. And at that time, the Seattle PI did an editorial cartoon about the Seattle Police Department. What should we take? Should we take the rape, the burglary, the killing over here, or the poker game? So they made a joke out of it. So we went to court, municipal court. The judge was Judge Charles Z. Smith. And he read off a litany of crimes that occurred that Friday night and said, the charges are dismissed, these folks are innocent. And Charles V. Johnson went, and I'm sure he talked to the judge even before the trial started, and said, hey, if they can play poker on 24th and Jackson at the south side, and the police officers will be in the very next room eating, then there should be no charges filed against these 14 brothers. And that's my Charles V. Johnson story. He's always been there, and I also want to remind people too, he was not just on the camp board, he was one of the founders of the Central Area Citizens Committee, which is the governing body of the Central Area Motivation Program. He's been there, he's the one that talked me into getting involved with the NAACP. Also, he encouraged me in all the struggles I had in terms of trying to get rights for African descendants of the United States enslaved in Seattle and in Martin Luther King Jr. County. So Charles V. Johnson, rest in peace. Miss Lizelle, Jimmy, Tracy, all you guys hang in there. You have a person, your dad, your grandfather, your great-grandfather is a man to be reveled, and you have a legacy that you need to adhere to and try to follow up on, and make sure you make the same contributions as your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather did. So thank you very much, and I enjoyed the time and the tutelage and mentorship, and sometimes the chastisement I got from Judge Charles V. Johnson. So thank you very much for your contribution, sir.
My name is Janice Green, and I'm the president of the NAACP's Snohomish County branch, and I want to pay my respects to Judge Johnson. He was an icon who contributed so much to society and to the community at large. He was selfless and generous and a role model for so many. He showed me that you can remain firm in your convictions and approach difficult situations with dignity and grace.
My name is J.D. Smith, and I am the Sire Archon of Alpha Omicron Boule of the Sigma Pi Phi fraternity, an organization that Judge Johnson was a member of for nearly 50 years. On behalf of my Arcuzai, Tanya Smith, the executive committee, and the Archons and Arcuzai of Alpha Omicron Boule, I proudly stopped by to just share with you a few things that are on my heart. And the old preacher used to say, there's only 2 kinds of speakers: people that want to say something and people that's got something to say. And I remember Judge Johnson always spoke with a gentleness, a kindness, and warmth. I can feel the warmth now. And he didn't say much, but when he did speak, it was impactful, it was meaningful, and people responded to him. I remember being told that when he was chairing the nominating committee, that if you were tapped on the shoulder, that it was time to step up. And when I was tapped to step into the leadership, I remember meeting with Judge Johnson in his home, and what he shared with me was more about why he was involved. And the organization was founded at the turn of the century when life was very isolating for Black professionals, both professionally and socially. And the organization went around the country, and it made its way to the West Coast in the late 50s, early 60s. And the organization is set up as boulets, where your other traditional Greek organizations are chapters, but Alpha Omicron Boulay here on the West Coast, Judge Johnson was a emeritus member, meaning that he had served over 40 years of continuous service, and in that time, he missed hardly any events. He was always present and dedicated. But I remember in meeting with him, he talked to me about the fact that the organization was founded with this goal of Black professionals having this network to be able to share and get to know the best of one another, and that we should socialize, get to know one another, be there for one another, support one another, but that we should also do more for the community. That social action is just as important to the organization as socializing. And I made that a prominent part of my agenda, and it will be. It will be. And Judge Johnson and Lizelle have inspired a whole generation of folks who are wanting to do things in a way that you all did, meaning that we give of ourselves in a way that's not about us, but that's about the community. And so, Tracy, Terry, Jim, I want you to know that we grieve with you, we stand with you, we support you. And Lizelle, we are so grateful for all the time that you both committed to the organization. And I am so grateful to provide this tribute about Archon Charles Vernon Johnson.
It is with a deep heart that I pass on my condolences, prayers, and blessings to the friends and families of our beloved Judge Charles V. Johnson. Judge Johnson was one of the leading members of the NAACP for the last 60 plus years. He served as president of the Seattle branch of the NAACP. He served as the president of the Pacific Northwest Area Conference of the NAACP. He served as a national board member for the NAACP. He's a lifetime member of the NAACP and has been an inspiration to so many people in Seattle, Washington State, Pacific Northwest, and the United States of America. He's a World War II veteran who served our country with honor and valor, and it has been a leading voice for peace, justice, and inequality in the United States of America, and he will be surely missed. We want to, at this time, thank him for all he has done for this country, all he has done for so many people, and it's especially important to know that Judge Johnson was not just a great judge, he was a great human being, and he will be greatly missed by me and so many other peoples. And once again, to the family of Judge Charles V. Johnson, my condolences, prayers, and best wishes. We love you.
My name is Gerald Hankerson, and I've come up under the tutelage from C.V. Johnson over the last 12 years, that when I came into the NAACP, that I was sitting around the table one day and realized that the history at this table exceeds the civil rights that I knew it to be as a young man. And as a 41-year-old person, to sit around a table of people that have been in the NAACP longer than I have been living, I knew that they had a testimony, and it was Judge Johnson that pulled me up out of curiosity, because he was unaware of a young kid coming in leadership role, and he felt the need to have to shape me. And of course, I remember the years that I used to sit around the table, sitting and talking with him, hearing his stories of him and Judge Haley about what civil rights was in their era. So when I started looking at civil rights today, I started looking at it through their eyes and understand, as a gentleman, as a smart man, this was the historian, as I figured to be, particularly in the city of Seattle. And I came to love Judge Johnson because there's a lot of things that I was doing that was considered controversial. And as he that said, I guess you just want to be baptized by fire. And I'll never forget that term, because he felt that I was electrifying to a degree that he hadn't seen yet. But for him to mold and shape me, and in many years that we used to sit and talk and listen to, when there's a question being asked by anyone in the country, I don't call our national president, I'll call C.V. Johnson. As a person that was largely responsible, that actually helped write the Constitution and the bylaws that I follow today, that I had the experience of being up under the person that actually created it. And just the impact of the rich history throughout Seattle is that how can you talk about history in Seattle when it comes to inequalities without referring to C.V. Johnson? You know, just the ability for being able to reach down in places that no one would normally reach or usually ignore, for him to grab us and teach us and help us along the way, because he in his mind felt like you're the next level, you're the next generation, versus just throwing the keys over his shoulder and says, your turn now. And that's what I loved about Judge Johnson. It's sad to see him go, obviously, because, you know, we want to be able to continue with that history and his legacy, but he's a legend. And I cannot say that about any other of the folks that I had the experience of knowing, but as a legend that helped shape mine and the careers of so many people, but most importantly, putting our community first. That's what I fell in love with Judge Johnson. I thanked him for all of his years of service. And the last piece I want to say, that when I came into the NAACP leadership role, it was the 100-year anniversary of our NAACP in Seattle. And I had no understanding that I was going to be that president that night. But no sooner than I became president, he came and grabbed me by the arm, took me in a broom closet, made me raise my right hand to give my oath as NAACP. And then he told me, I'm only going to stick around for a couple of years to make sure you get on your feet, because I'm old, Gerald. And I felt that after 2 years, he decided to retire, officially retire. I figured that he knew that I was on my feet, and I thank you for that, because he's what introduced me what civil rights is.
My name is Craig Sims, and I am one of the lawyers, one of the many people who Judge Johnson has inspired over the course of his lifetime. And we are here today, not in the spirit of mourning. We are here today in the spirit of acknowledgement and of celebration of a life well lived. We are also here to address what I believe we can all agree is a very serious matter: the charge. Judge Johnson is charged with living a life worthy of entering the gates of heaven and creating a legacy that will live on for future generations. To make a fair and just verdict, we must examine the testimony and the evidence that has been developed over the course of 92 years. The evidence has been shown that makes it clear beyond the shadow of a doubt that Judge Johnson was in the vanguard of a movement to change our world. We've seen the evidence of how the arc of his journey started in the segregated South, in the small town of Malvern, Arkansas, and how the dirt roads of Arkansas led him to Germany, where he served in the military, representing our country. And upon his return to the South, having seen the reality of an unsegregated world, decided he wanted the very same for the country that he called his home. And so his journey led him from the segregated South to the red line city of Seattle, Washington, where he ultimately enrolled at the University of Washington Law School, and where he was the only Black law student in his class. We have seen the evidence and heard the testimony of his involvement in his church, First AME. We've seen the evidence and have heard the testimony of his involvement in the NAACP, the Lauren Miller Bar Club, which ultimately became the Lauren Miller Bar Association. We have read how he participated in demonstrations to end segregation in housing, to end segregation in schools. We have heard the stories of how when he became a judge, he ensured the integrity of the law and the system was never undermined on his watch. And how he was on the never-ending quest to promote justice, equity, and peace, as shown in many ways, including through his involvement in a program that is now called the Charles V. Johnson Youth in Law Forum. We have seen the proof and that even in retirement, he continued to serve as an advisor, as a confidant, and as a counselor. And as you continue to further examine the evidence, do not forget that his hero's journey was anchored by an amazing family, to include his wife, Mrs. Lizelle Johnson, and his children, Jimmy, Terry, and Tracy, and their respective families, and a host of extended families and those who loved him. And in the end, as we examine the accumulation of 92 years worth of evidence, I reflect on the words that I've heard many times throughout my lifetime. The true measure of a person's life is measured not by time, but by their ability to distinguish true and false and make courageous choices. The measure of a person's life is ultimately calculated not by the tangible things, but the impact their legacy leaves upon their family, the impact their legacy leaves upon their community, and the impact their legacy leaves upon the children who have yet to be born. And now, ladies and gentlemen, having received the overwhelming evidence and having heard the compelling testimony, it is time to call the question. In calling the question, I ask that you stand on your feet wherever you are and proclaim your judgment to the world. To the charge of the Honorable Charles Vernon Johnson, living a life worthy of entering the gates of heaven and creating a legacy that will last for generations. How do you find? Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Guilty.
Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Guilty.
Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty. Guilty.
He is indeed guilty.
Having been rightfully found guilty of the charge, we will now turn to the judge, the Almighty Judge, for sentencing. We will turn to the Almighty Judge and respectfully request with every ounce of our faith a sentence that is fair, a sentence that is just, and a sentence that is right. We will respectfully request to the Almighty Judge a sentence of eternal life in heaven. And that when he enters the gates of heaven, he will be greeted with the words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." And as he rightfully takes his place next to the throne, that a crown be placed upon his head, and that his judge's robe be exchanged for a heavenly robe. And as he puts on that robe, he will tell the story of how he made it over. He will tell the story of how he was faithful and a good servant to his God. He will tell the story of how he was faithful and a good servant to his family. He will tell the story of how he was faithful and a good servant to his community. Judge Johnson, you have ran a good race, and you have fought a good fight. And you have passed on the baton. And we, the community of those of you who have inspired and you have influenced, we shall carry that baton proudly and know that we will carry that baton with due care, with courage, and with dignity. And we will do everything that we can to ensure that your legacy continues on for the next generation and those future generations after that. Judge Charles Johnson, thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for all of your service while here on earth. And it will be our continued prayer that you rest in power, that you rest in peace. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we rest our case.
God is still working miracles. 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 Faith is the substance of things hoped for. It is the evidence of things not seen. And although my faith is being tried today, He reassured me the Lord will make a way. You know, sometimes it seems that praying is in vain. When all of life's problems